worst medication I have ever tried in my entire life is definitely Percocet. Oxycontin, Xanax bars, Percocet and Loratab, Valium morphine patches, ecstasy, and it's all up for grabs. I'm a licensed pharmacist in 3 states, and I know every song in the world that has ever referenced any medication because I love medication. In fact, I am medication, if we're being honest. Frequently, I take medications to try them and experiment with them and show you guys what they do, meaning that at any given amount of time, I probably have medication in me. I actually took so many medications lately, I had to take another medication to help with my rumbly and my tumbly. That video will be dropping on TikTok at some point. Anyway, don't get me off track. I love talking about medications, but we're only talking about one medication today, and it is Percocet. There are actually 2 songs about lithium. I can't stop thinking about the songs now. I want to make a video about all my favorite songs that mention medications, but I probably can't because DMCA or something like that. Anyway, we love a good Percocet story, and I have to tell you, this was probably one of the worst experiences of my life. Before we get into my personal experience, I wanted to tell you a little bit about Percocet. Percocet, also known as oxycodone acetaminophen, is actually a combination of 2 medications. So there's oxycodone and acetaminophen. And yes, that's the same acetaminophen that you can buy over the counter without a prescription. Acetaminophen is said to have opioid sparing properties. I question whether if that's super relevant or not, but regardless, I couldn't say it's a bad thing to put it in combination with oxycodone. So the theory there is, by taking Percocet, let's say 5 milligram of oxycodone, 325 milligram of acetaminophen, you would feel more pain relief than if you were to take oxycodone 5 milligram by itself. Certainly the heavy lifter in Percocet is the oxycodone, and oxycodone is what I will call a traditional opioid. It's very similar in structure to codeine, morphine, diacetylmorphine. Who can tell me what diacetylmorphine is? I want to hear it in the comments. I won't tell you. And they all look the same, and they all behave relatively the same. In fact, the differences between some of these more traditional opioids is honestly quite inconsequential. The only thing I can say out front is everybody hates codeine. Codeine's stupid. In fact, codeine actually doesn't even do anything. It has to be metabolized into morphine first. Morphine is great. It's pretty much the standard, really, if we're being honest. Morphine has a very high first pass metabolism, which is something that happens whenever more lipophilic molecules enter the body and then get chewed up by the liver first, and then they disperse throughout the bloodstream, and this process kind of continues. But typically, if something has a pretty high first pass metabolism effect, the dose of it needs to be pretty high, as is the case with morphine. Very niche, probably not relevant for most people. Morphine is not the best for people who have kidney dysfunction because morphine is transformed into 2 metabolites, and one is actually kind of neurotoxic, and it builds up in the system of people who have kidney dysfunction, and it can cause pretty severe agitation, really. That's where meds like oxycodone come into play. There is not, or at least not nearly as much of a bad metabolite, so to speak, whenever you take oxycodone, and there's no neurotoxic metabolites to build up in people who have kidney dysfunction. Each little opioid has their different little tips and tricks and quirks about it, but for the most part, most of them are quite similar. In fact, you can even convert from one opioid to another, and you can get very, very similar pain relief by using mathematical equations. People often say the phrase perk 30, and that is the dumbest thing you could ever say in your entire life. First of all, Percocet is not an opioid. That is more closely related to aspirin. It is an NSAID. Percocet is, as stated previously, a combination of oxycodone and acetaminophen. It does not come in a 30 milligram. I think it comes in a 2.5-300, a 2.5-325, a 5-325, a 7.5-325, a 10-325, and I think that's it. There is no 30 milligram to be spoken of. This is actually a pretty important concept because I see medical professionals make this mistake all of the time. The brand name dictates the active ingredients and what strengths are available. If you use generic name, that's fine, but you have to specify those things then. One of the dumbest ones, and anybody who's watching this who's a pharmacist or a doctor, probably most nurses would know too, is diltiazem. There's like a million different diltiazams. So just saying diltiazem means absolutely nothing because there's so many options. Bupropion is another. There's Wellbutrin, there's Zyban, there's 450. All of these are bupropions, but they have different release mechanisms and durations of action. So if I were to get a prescription for oxycodone 5 milligram, one tablet every 4 hours as needed, I would know that they're talking about specifically oxycodone, or roxycodone would be the brand name. If they said Percocet 5 milligram, one tablet every 4 hours as needed, that's technically not enough information because I don't know what the acetaminophen component is. Now I know that it only comes in one combination, 5-325, but like hydrocodone, for example, that comes in 5-325 and 5-300. I know that pretty much made no sense to everyone watching this video, and for this reason, I also hate my profession. Here's another dumb example. Sildenafil is the active ingredient in Revatio, which is used to treat pulmonary hypertension. And sildenafil is the active ingredient in Viagra, which is used to treat erectile dysfunction. How does that make sense? It's just very stupid. It's just the world we live in. That's all I have to say about that. Anyway, back to Percocet. Once you take any opioid, especially oxycodone, it dissolves in the stomach, it's absorbed in the intestines, and it will interact with these receptors called opioid receptors. There's mu and kappa. Those are the most important ones, and particularly mu. And once the molecule binds to that receptor, it sets off a cascade of events and starts this process of analgesia. And yes, there's a sense of euphoria, and Percocet is very addictive. Or habit forming, I guess would be the appropriate way to say that. It's like super duper habit forming, so much so that there's this epidemic, and then the government did something, but they also did nothing. It's been a fun couple decades for the medical community. And of course, there are people who absolutely need these medications to survive. I mean, there are some people whose pain is so chronic and so intolerable that without these medications, I mean, it would be inhumane to make them experience these pains that they didn't deserve. But Percocet and all other opioids are highly regulated. Percocet is Schedule 2, which means it's the second most highest regulated class in the United States. And thus, there's so much red tape, there's so many laws that have to align perfectly for people to get their medication that a lot of the time it doesn't work out correctly. And, for X, Y, and Z reasons, starting at the top, at the DEA, all the way down to store policy, lots of people end up going without their medication. So there I was on a frosty winter evening in the spring of 2012. I don't remember when it was, but I got my wisdom teeth out at one point. And the surgeon, who everybody knew because I was in a small town, gave me a prescription for Percocet. And I was like, okay, how bad can this be? I went home. I woke up in a daisy haze of I don't even know what. And I was in so much pain, I would have rather gone back to sleep. I took the Percocet. It was 5-325, I remember. And it really helped with the pain. But it also had a side effect. Now, I already mentioned that there's habit forming, there's euphoria, and also in high doses, I mean, you can have a breathing emergency, and that can be fatal. But that's not the side effect that I was experiencing. I was experiencing constipation. The worst constipation that you could ever imagine. It was so bad, and you would try to go, you push, and my head would just be thumping the most, like someone was beating a drum in my head hole, beating a drum in my head with a guitar and an anvil all at the same time. It got to the point where the constipation was so bad that I would have rather just been in pain, and in fact I did. I stopped taking it. And like I'm smiling, I'm laughing, I'm joking about this. This is a real problem, so much so that we have medications to treat specifically opioid-induced constipation. It works the exact opposite way of an opioid does. So this can be very, very serious. In fact, proper technique whenever prescribing opioids, especially for chronic pain patients, is to always include a medication for treating the constipation. I can't imagine taking Percocet again. I never want to. I hope I never am faced in a situation where I have to choose between taking Percocet or being in pain because both seem equally as appealing to me, honestly.